The rain came down sideways, cold, mean. The kind of rain that finds the gap between a collar and a neck and stays there until you stop being a person and become just another wet, shivering thing standing in an alley behind a dying strip mall. A liquor store sign buzzed pink overhead, half the letters dead, the other half flickering, as if deciding whether to keep burning or just quit. A set of acrylic nails dug into a girl's arm. Hard enough to leave marks. Little crescent moons pressed into skin. 3 years of them, then headlights tore through the rain. Blinding white. A black SUV rolled to a stop at the mouth of the alley. The engine idled low, a sound like something breathing in the dark. Something patient. Something that had waited a very long time and learned not to mind the waiting. A man stepped out. Opened an umbrella with the unhurried calm of someone who had never needed to hurry. And he reached for the rear door. Blood tastes like rusted pennies. That was the only clear thought in my head when my stepmother shoved me down onto the wet pavement. At the feet of a man the whole city only spoke about in whispers. In the dark, behind locked doors. They traded my life for $50,000 and a clean slate at the underground tables. I was supposed to be dead by morning. A toy for a monster. A thing to be used and thrown away, except monsters don't always have fangs. Sometimes the only way to survive the dark is to learn how to rule it. The rain came down sideways. Cold, mean. The kind of rain that finds the gap between your collar and your neck and stays there until you stop being a person and become just another wet, cold, miserable thing standing in an alley behind a dying strip mall. I was 18 years old. Canvas sneakers that had given up on me 3 winters ago. The water had soaked clean through the soles. My toes had gone numb an hour back, maybe longer. Time moves differently when you're waiting to find out what your life is worth. A liquor store sign buzzed pink above us. Half the letters dead, the other half flickering. Trying to decide whether to keep going or just quit. I understood the impulse. Stand straight, Adeline. Stop looking so pathetic, Margaret. My stepmother. A hiss, low and sharp, barely cutting through the downpour. She smelled like cheap vanilla, body spray, and the specific kind of sweat that comes from being very afraid and trying very hard not to show it. Her acrylic nails dug into my arm through my sweater. Hard enough to leave marks. She'd been leaving marks on me for 3 years. Little crescent moons pressed into skin. What was one more night? Next to her, my stepsister Sienna stared at her phone. Thumbs moving. Pretending none of this was happening. Her designer boots, bought with the last of my father's life insurance money, splashed in a puddle as she shifted her weight. I didn't scream. Screaming takes energy. And I had been running on empty for a very long time. 3 years, to be exact. 3 years since my father's heart gave out, or so they told me. 3 years since I became the maid, the punching bag. The primary source of income for 2 women who treated me like a household expense they resented paying. And now. Tonight, headlights cut through the rain. Blinding white. I threw my hand up over my eyes. A black SUV rolled to a stop at the mouth of the alley. Heavy tires, broken glass crunching wet gravel. The engine idled low, a sound like something breathing in the dark, something patient. Something that had been waiting a very long time and had learned not to mind. Sienna finally looked up from her phone. Her jaw went tight. Margaret's grip on my arm turned from uncomfortable to agonizing. A man stepped out of the driver's side. For one stupid animal second, my whole body braced for something terrible. But it wasn't him, just a man in a suit. A suit that probably cost more than every dollar I'd ever earned combined. He opened an umbrella. Walked around the back of the car with the unhurried steps of someone who had never needed to hurry. Opened the rear door with the precise care of a man who understood ceremony. And then Dorian Vale stepped out onto the pavement. I had built him into something enormous in my head, horns. A grin full of sharp teeth. The kind of monster the local news loved to gesture at vaguely on slow news nights, careful never to say his name too directly, as if saying it clearly might summon something. But there were no horns, just a tall man, broad through the shoulders. A dark wool overcoat soaked at the collar from the short walk between the car and the alley. His hair was damp, stuck to his forehead in a way that looked almost ordinary, almost human, and he looked tired. Not the performed exhaustion of powerful men who want sympathy. Real tired, bone tired. The kind of tired that lives behind the eyes and never fully leaves no matter how much you sleep. Under the sick pink flicker of the liquor store sign, his eyes were the color of wet slate, flat, still. Completely uninterested in me, Mr. Vale. Margaret's voice had changed entirely, all the cruelty gone, just desperation now, naked and awful. I brought her. Just like we agreed, he didn't look at her. He looked at me. His gaze moved across my face, down to the frayed cuffs of my too big sweater, down further to my soaked, shaking knees. There was no hunger in it, no cruelty either, nothing. The look of a man assessing a piece of machinery, checking function, not interested in anything beyond that. This is the collateral. His voice was gravel and smoke, rough at the edges. It seemed to hang in the wet air a beat longer than it should have. Yes, Margaret breathed, almost vibrating. She's a hard worker, quiet, doesn't complain. She'll do whatever you need. The debt is clear now, right? We're square? The suited man beside Dorian reached inside his jacket, pulled out a thick manila envelope, and tossed it onto the wet ground at Margaret's feet. It landed with a flat slap in a puddle of oily water. Your markers, the suited man said. Don't come back to the gilded room. Next time, we don't accept trade-ins. Margaret dropped her knees in the dirty water, snatching that envelope up like it was oxygen, and she didn't look at me. Not once. Sienna grabbed her mother's shoulder, pulled her back toward the shadows at the far end of the alley. Her designer boots made soft, splashing sounds as they retreated. No goodbye, no I'm sorry, no last look, they just left, and I was standing alone in the rain. With the monster, Dorian nodded toward the open rear door of the SUV. Get in. I looked down at my hands, shaking, raw, red from the cold and from 3 years of work that was never gentle. I could run. I knew these alleys, every cracked wall and dead-end passage. I'd hidden in them before when hiding was the only skill I had. But my sneakers were waterlogged. My lungs already ached. I had exactly $0 to my name. No phone, no coat, nowhere to go that Margaret didn't know about. Survival is a luxury. For the rested, for the funded, I was neither, so I walked to the car. The inside of the SUV smelled like expensive leather, stale cigarettes, and underneath everything else, faint but unmistakable, gun oil. I slid into the back seat and sank into the upholstery, and the thing that undid me, just a little, was that it was warm. Actually warm. Heated seats. Climate control set to something humane. I pulled my knees to my chest, wrapped my arms around my legs, tried to make the shaking stop. Dorian got in beside me. The door closed and the rain just vanished. Like someone had switched off the world, the driver put the car in gear. We rolled away from the alley, away from the pink sign, away from the only life I'd ever known. Miserable. But known. You're dripping on the leather, Dorian said, softly. Not accusatory. Just a fact. I stared at the back of the driver's headrest. Sorry. Bill my stepmother for the cleaning. A slow exhale beside me. Not quite a laugh. But something adjacent. There's a towel in the compartment by your feet. Dry your hair. I fumbled the latch with stiff fingers. Found a thick black microfiber towel. Pressed it to my face. It smelled like clean cotton. Like nothing had ever gone wrong anywhere in the world. I closed my eyes. I was sitting in the back of a car belonging to a man who, the stories said, left his rivals in shipping containers and his enemies without next of kin. I was entirely at the mercy of a cartel boss. And as the heater blew warm air across my frozen skin, I felt something I had absolutely no business feeling. Relief. God help me. Relief. The Vale estate wasn't a dungeon. It was a fortress wearing the face of an architectural dream. Glass and stone and clean lines built into the side of a cliff, looking out over the black churning water of the bay. The kind of house that appears in magazines under headlines about visionaries and innovators. The kind of house you assume belongs to someone who earned it honestly. When we arrived, Dorian didn't drag me anywhere, didn't shout, didn't demonstrate power in any of the ways I'd been bracing for during the entire drive. He just walked through the big glass doors, tossed his keys onto a marble console table, and pointed down a long hallway. Third door on the left. Stay out of the east wing. Breakfast is at 7. Don't touch the thermostats. Already shrugging off his wet coat. Already done with me, I stood in the entryway, dripping onto pristine hardwood. And before my brain could organize a response, my mouth just opened. That's it. He paused, half turned, one heavy brow lifting. Were you expecting a tour? It's late. Go to sleep, I was expecting. I swallowed, hard, the words clawing their way up from somewhere frightened. I was expecting a cage, or something worse than a cage. He looked at me for a long, uncomfortable moment. The house was utterly silent around us. No ticking clocks, no hum of appliances. Just the faint, distant crash of waves against the rocks somewhere below the cliff. Your stepmother owed me $50,000, he he said. Conversational. The way you'd discuss grocery prices. She spent it on rigged baccarat and cheap gin. I don't run a brothel, Adeline. I run a business. You're here because she needed to lose something that hurt her. And she convinced herself you were valuable enough to hurt over. A pause. His eyes moved over me once more. Flat and assessing, judging by the way she left you in the dirt. I'm guessing she was wrong about that. The words hit like a palm across the cheek. Not because they were cruel, because they were just. True, in a way that had no mercy in it, but also no malice. Then why take me? My voice shook. I hated that it shook. If I'm worth nothing, why agree to the trade at all? He turned fully toward me, and something in those flat, dead eyes shifted. Got colder. Got sharper. Like a lens adjusting focus. Because she thinks I'm going to tear you apart. A pause. She thinks she fed you to the devil to save her own skin. Let her spend the rest of her life with that ghost. It's better leverage than cash, and then he walked away. Heavy footsteps fading down a different corridor, leaving me alone in a house that smelled of lemon polish and old, patient secrets. The room was real, large, clean, walls a soft, calming gray, a king-sized bed with white linen so smooth it looked ironed, a bathroom bigger than the bedroom I'd had growing up, and a closet full of clothes, neutral colors, practical cuts, quality fabric, all in my exact size, which meant someone had measured me. Somewhere, sometime before tonight. Someone had planned for my arrival down to the inch. That scared me more than a cage would have. I locked the door. Ridiculous. Locking a door in a house controlled by a man like that. But the click of the lock was the only thing that night that felt like it belonged to me. So I kept it. I peeled off my wet clothes, left them in a heap, stepped into the shower. The water came out blistering hot. I stood under it until my skin went pink, scrubbed at my arms and legs with unscented soap, scrubbed until the alley was gone, until Margaret's cheap vanilla was gone, until the cold and the rain and the smell of oily puddle water was gone. Then I crawled into the bed, the mattress, God, it just gave way under me. Memory foam, conforming to every ache, cradling every bruise. The most comfortable thing I had ever felt in 18 years of living in a body. I lay there in the dark, ceiling above me, waiting for the panic to arrive. The full weight of what had happened tonight pressing down until it cracked something. I was a prisoner. I was collateral. I was owned, in some technical and hell very real sense, by a man who killed people for a living. But I didn't have to make Margaret's breakfast tomorrow. I didn't have to scrub Sienna's mess off the bathroom tiles after one of her late nights. I didn't have to work a double shift at the diner just to watch my entire paycheck disappear into a handbag that wasn't mine, the safest I had felt in 3 years. Was in the bed of a monster. I let that irony sit on my tongue, bitter, strange, and I slept. Here is something you need to understand about me. Before the alley, before any of it, my father taught me numbers, not the way school teaches you. Not formulas and tests and the numb mechanical repetition of a system designed to process children in batches. Thomas Crow taught me numbers the way other fathers teach their kids to fish. Patient, hands-on, late at night at the kitchen table with a single lamp burning yellow and a ledger open between us like a shared secret. Money leaves footprints, Addie, he used to say. Every dollar. Always. The trick isn't hiding the dollar. The trick is making the footprints lead somewhere that doesn't exist. I was a kid. I thought it was a game. I thought he was an accountant for a shipping company. Ordinary. Boring in the comfortable way that only becomes precious after it's gone. A man with reading glasses and a soft voice and the smell of coffee and pencil shavings. I was wrong about the ordinary part. He showed me how to read a balance sheet before I could drive. How to spot a lie hidden inside a column of perfectly accurate numbers. How to make money walk through 3 doors and come out clean on the other side. Numbers don't lie, Addie. People lie. Numbers just sit there and wait for someone smart enough to listen. He died when I was 15. Heart attack, they said. Found at his desk. Slumped over a stack of papers. I believed it. Why wouldn't I? He worked too hard and drank too much coffee and carried something in him that I always sensed but never named. That weight. That particular stillness that comes from knowing things you can't say out loud. I believed the heart attack for 3 years. I was wrong about that too, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The next few weeks settled into something I hadn't expected, a routine strange. Suffocating in its ordinariness, but a routine I was a ghost in a beautiful machine. Present but unintegrated. Moving through rooms that weren't mine, sitting in chairs that felt borrowed, eating food prepared by a kitchen. I wasn't sure I was allowed to fully use. There were guards, of course. Men in dark clothing at the edges of the property, watching the gates, watching the water. One of them was younger than the others, a man named Matteo, with a scar that bisected his left eyebrow clean in two. He brought my meals on the days I didn't feel like navigating the kitchen. Never spoke, just set the tray down, gave me a small, precise nod, and left. Dorian himself was almost never visible. I saw him mostly in the mornings. I'd come into the kitchen and he'd already be there at the island. Black coffee, a tablet. The kind of absorbed silence that means someone is actually working and not performing the idea of it. We almost never spoke during these mornings. But I started sitting down instead of grabbing my plate and retreating. Something about the silence between us. It wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't threatening either. It was just heavy. Two people on opposite ends of a transaction neither of them quite knew how to carry. One morning he set a second mug in front of me without looking up, black. Same as his. I didn't ask how he knew. I just wrapped my hands around the warmth of it. "You were up at 3, he said. Still reading his tablet, light sleeper. Every night, this week, I looked at him over the rim. "Do you track my sleep schedule?" "I track everything in this house." He turned a page. "It's how people stay alive." I thought about the notebook under my mattress. Thought about saying something. Didn't, not yet. One evening he was at the long dining table, a plate of food going cold in front of him. I walked in for water, intending to grab a glass and disappear back to my room. Sit, not a request, just a word. One word, dropped into the room like a stone into still water. I froze, then I pulled out a chair. The one at the far end. Maximum 10 feet of polished wood between us. "The food here is good," he said, cutting into something green on his plate. "But you're losing weight. The clothes my people ordered are hanging off your shoulders. I eat. You eat like an animal waiting to be kicked away from the bowl." He set his fork down. The silver against the porcelain was very loud in all that quiet. "I told you, Adeline, I don't harm women under my roof. You can stop bracing every time I walk into a room." "I'm not bracing, a lie. An obvious one." He leaned back, studied me. The overhead light caught a few threads of silver at his temples. "Not old, just marked by time. You sleep with your back against the wall. You flinch every time Matteo opens a door too fast. And you hold your breath for the first 3 seconds every time I appear." He was not unkind about it, just precise. Those aren't the behaviors of someone who isn't bracing. My nails had found my palms. Little half moons, I was sold for $50,000 by the woman who was supposed to take care of me. Forgive me if my nervous system hasn't caught up with the new accommodations. A muscle moved in his jaw. He didn't offer me a consoling lie. Didn't tell me things would be fine. Didn't perform warmth he didn't feel. "You're not here because of the money," he said instead. 50,000 is nothing. It's a rounding error on a bad week." I looked up. "Then why am I here?" Something moved behind those slate eyes. A door, shifting on its hinges. "Just a fraction, because you were discarded," he said. "And I collect things that people throw away. Why?" The word came out sharper than intended. "You enjoy looking at wreckage?" "No," he stood, pushed his chair back, left the food. "I enjoy knowing exactly what something is worth, especially when everyone else gets it wrong." He walked out, left me alone at the long table with the cold food and my hammering heart and the strangest, coldest feeling that he hadn't told me everything. Not even close. It was the closet that cracked the world open a week after the dinner. A quiet afternoon. The coastal rain had stopped for once, and gray light came through the windows, soft and pale, the kind of light that makes everything look like a memory. I was reaching up to the high shelf, looking for a sweater, and my fingers found something that wasn't fabric, a notebook old. Leather cover gone soft and cracked with use. Shoved into the back corner of the shelf like something hidden and then forgotten. Or hidden and then left for someone specific to find. I shouldn't have opened it, but I did. And the world tilted sideways so hard I had to grip the closet door to stay standing, because I knew that handwriting, the hard slant of the 7s. The way the lowercase g curled back on itself, like it was trying to hold something in. The tiny extra pressure at the end of every line, where the pen pushed too hard because the mind was working too fast. I had watched that hand write at a kitchen table under a single lamp for years. That was my father's hand, Thomas Crow's handwriting. Here, in this house. In a notebook hidden in the closet of the bedroom, belonging to the man who had bought me in a rainy alley for the price of a decent used car. My knees went out. I sat down on the closet floor, hard, the notebook shaking in both hands. I flipped through it. Columns of numbers, account codes, dates spanning years. Names I didn't recognize written in that patient, careful script. And then, on the last page that had writing on it, just a few lines, underlined twice. The paper almost torn through from how hard the pencil had pressed. If they find this, they already know I found them. Protect the girl. She's all that matters, the girl me. He'd written that, my father. About me, in a notebook hidden in this house. I sat on that closet floor while the gray light changed, and the waves crashed somewhere below, and I started slowly to understand the size of the thing I had walked into. My father hadn't worked for a shipping company, or rather, he had, among other things. And he had died at his desk, they said. Heart attack. Found in the morning by a colleague, except my father had been healthy. Except my father had carried something heavy in him for years. Except my father had sat across from me at a kitchen table and taught me how to make money, leave no footprints. And now his handwriting was in a notebook in the bedroom of a crime boss. And the notebook was a map, and the map led somewhere dark. I was done sitting on closet floors waiting for someone to tell me what was happening. I found Dorian in his office. I shoved the door open without knocking, the notebook in my fist. 3 years of grief and confusion, and something that was rapidly becoming fury burning in my chest. He was at his desk. He looked up, and when he saw what I was holding, something in his face went profoundly, carefully still. "Where did you get that?" he said. Not a question, my closet. I dropped it on his desk. It landed hard. "Why does this house have a notebook with my dead father's handwriting in it?" A long silence. He looked at the notebook, at me. And for the first time since the alley, I saw something move behind those flat slate eyes that wasn't calculation or boredom. It looked almost exactly like grief. "Sit down, Adeline." "No. You don't get to manage this with a chair offer. That's my father's handwriting." "Tell me what he was to you." He stood. Walked to the window. The black water of the bay below. He stood looking at it for a moment that stretched almost past endurance. "Your father," he said quietly, "was the most gifted accountant I have ever known, and the only genuinely honest man I encountered in 11 years of this business. The floor moved under me. He worked for you. He worked for the man before me. And then for me. For 11 years total, Dorian's voice was even, but the evenness was the kind that costs something to maintain. He could move money through 3 countries and leave no trace a government on earth could follow. He kept books that were works of art, and he loved exactly one thing in this world. He finally turned from the window. I could not breathe. The room was wrong somehow. Too close. Everything too close, the $50,000, I said, getting the mechanics of it clear. Margaret's debt. That was real, yes. But it wasn't why you arranged for me to come here, the smallest shake of his head. Was it Margaret's idea? The tables, the debt trading me off. He looked at me steadily, was it? And there it was. The cold thing. Sliding down the back of my neck like a drop of water finding the lowest point, the gilded room. Rigged baccarat. A debt that grew exactly fast enough. A woman who couldn't manage a grocery budget, somehow racking up precisely $50,000 at precisely the right tables at precisely the right time. The trick isn't hiding the dollar. The trick is making the footprints lead somewhere that doesn't exist. "You set it up," I said, barely above a whisper. "All of it. You drove her into the ground so she'd have nothing left to trade but me." He didn't deny it. He just looked at me with that expression I had no name for, heavy. "Carried a long distance. I made your father a promise," he said. "Before he died. I am a man with very few rules. But I keep the ones I make. What promise?" My hands were shaking. "What did you promise him?" He didn't answer that. Not directly. Not yet. He picked up the notebook, held it for a moment with a care that looked almost like reverence, then set it back down in front of me. "It's yours," he said. "It was always yours." And he walked out of his own office. Left me standing there, holding my dead father's secrets and the dawning, terrifying understanding that I was not collateral at all. I was a key to a lock I couldn't see yet, and somewhere in the dark, the man who had actually killed my father was still breathing. I didn't know his name yet, but I was Tomas Crow's daughter. And my father had taught me to follow the numbers all the way to the end, no matter where they led. The notebook lived under my mattress after that. Not hidden. Not exactly. just close. The way you keep something precious when you don't yet know what to do with it but can't bear to put it anywhere far from your body. I read it every night before I slept, my father's handwriting moving under my fingertips in the dark. Columns of numbers that looked like standard ledger entries but weren't. Names compressed into account codes. Dates that didn't match any legitimate shipping schedule I'd ever encountered. He'd been keeping 2 sets of books his entire career. One for them, one for himself. The second set was a map. Complete. Meticulous. Every dollar that went somewhere it shouldn't. Every name attached to a movement that couldn't survive daylight. Who took cuts they weren't authorized. Who smiled across a conference table while siphoning from the man at the head of it. My father had spent 11 years building a case that he never got to use because someone found out he was building it and made sure he never got the chance to finish. I lay in the dark with the notebook pressed against my chest like a second heartbeat and understood, for the first time, the true shape of my grief, 3 years of it. Solid and wet, like cement that had been poured into my chest cavity and left to set. He hadn't just died, he had been erased. And I still didn't know who held the pen. I started going to the kitchen earlier, not because of the food. Though the food was extraordinary, and I was slowly, cautiously, starting to eat like a person who expected the meal to still be there when she reached for it, because Dorian was always there at 7. Black coffee, his tablet, that particular structured silence. I started sitting down instead of taking my plate back to my room. We didn't talk much at first, I read. He worked. The coffee maker cycled through its process. The light off the bay shifted through grays and golds as the sun came up. But I watched him. The way he moved through a room with the economy of someone who has never needed to prove anything by taking up space. The way he paused before answering his phone, as if deciding not just what to say, but whether to say anything. The particular exhaustion he carried at the end of long days. Not arrogance, something more complicated than arrogance, responsibility. The crushing private kind, the kind that doesn't leave you alone even when you close the door. One morning he set a second coffee in front of me, black, same as his, without being asked, without comment. You were up at 3 again, he said. Lot on my mind, every night this week. Lot on my mind every night this week. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, just an acknowledgement that I was funny, which was, inexplicably, one of the nicer things anyone had done for me in recent memory. It was Matteo who gave me the first real information. 2 weeks in, he was dropping a tray, standard, set it down, turned to go, and then stopped. He'd seen the notebook, open on the desk. His face went to a particular kind of still that told me everything before he said a word. You found it, he said. It was in the closet, I know, a beat. I put it there. I looked at him. Dorian asked me to, he said carefully. Before you arrived. He said if you found it, you were worth the trouble. If you didn't find it, or found it and didn't understand it, you weren't ready. He tested me with my dead father's private records. Matteo looked genuinely uncomfortable, which, from a man who carried a firearm and generally operated with the emotional expressiveness of good furniture, was notable. He tests everything, Matteo said. It's how he knows what holds under pressure. Were you tested too? His jaw moved. He looked at the window, the bay, the water that was always out there, always moving. I was 16, he said finally. Owed money I hadn't borrowed. To people who weren't interested in explanations or timelines, he touched the scar through his eyebrow. Brief, unconscious. Dorian paid the debt. Brought me here. That was 8 years ago. 8 years. Since he was 16. In service to a cartel boss, does that bother you? I asked. Because I genuinely wanted to know. He was quiet for a moment. Considering it honestly rather than reflexively, it did. For a while, he picked up the empty tray from the day before. Then, I stopped measuring my life against what it might have been and started measuring it against what it was going to be instead. He walked to the door, paused, didn't turn around. He keeps his promises. I know that doesn't mean what you need it to mean yet, but it will. He left. I sat with my father's notebook and the ghost of an understanding that was forming somewhere in the deep, patient part of my mind. The part that my father had trained. The part that knew how to wait. 2 weeks became a month. And then Dorian's accountant vanished. He didn't announce it. I assembled the picture from context, the tablet replaced by paper. Phone calls in the hallway instead of the office, the crease between his brows that deepened and stayed. 3 days after the disappearance, he came into the kitchen and there was no tablet, just folders. and a coffee he wasn't drinking. I sat across from him. "Your accountant," I said. "He's gone." "Yes, he took something. Encrypted financial records. 4 years of operational data. Access codes to 3 shell companies. He said it the way you say something you've been grinding on for days. He's either dead or he sold the information to someone. Either way, the books are gone." I looked at the folders. "What's in those?" "Fragments. Paper copies. Not enough to reconstruct anything coherent. But I have shipments moving and payroll due and payments that need routing in ways that can't be traced, and I have no one to run any of it. The coffee maker. The waves. The specific silence of a man who is not accustomed to admitting he needs help and is doing so anyway. I thought about my father at the kitchen table. The lamp. The ledger. The way the pencil pressed harder at the end of each line when he was really thinking something through. "Numbers don't lie," I said. Mostly to myself. Dorian looked at me. I looked at the folders. "What's your routing structure?" 4 days. 4 days sitting across from Dorian Vale in an office that smelled of cedarwood and old paper and the quiet authority of expensive scotch that nobody was drinking. 4 days of my keyboard and his pen and the occasional rustle of a folder sliding across the desk between us. I learned the anatomy of a criminal empire. It was nothing like the movies. No dramatic cash counting, no chaos. Just spreadsheets, tax codes. Shell company structures nested inside each other like precision-engineered Russian dolls. Just numbers moving through the shadows with practiced quietness. Trying not to make noise. Trying to leave no footprints. Dorian managed the logistics of his world. I cleaned the financial residue. We existed in a strange functional orbit. 2 professionals with very different skill sets, working on the same problem from opposite sides of a desk. And in the process, I started to see his operation the way my father must have seen it. The discipline of it. The internal coherence. The rules he kept that most men in his position had abandoned long ago. No operations near schools. No product moving through neighborhoods where children played. No debts collected against people who had no means to pay them. He had a code. Strange, iron. Buried under everything else like a foundation no one was supposed to see. I didn't comment on it. But I noticed on the 3rd night, working late, I found it. Small. The kind of thing that vanishes into the noise if you're looking for the big picture and not the seams. A $62,000 transfer to a Cayman account. Labeled logistical oversight on a shipment that, according to every other document in the folder, had cleared customs without any third-party involvement at all. I stared at it. Checked the date. Checked the originating account. Checked the routing number twice, then a 3rd time. The money had bypassed the central holding account entirely. Just vanished. I made a note, put a red mark next to the line, and kept going. The dinner happened on a Friday, Dorian's inner circle. A table full of men who occupied their chairs with the settled entitlement of people who had never in their lives expected to be told no and had stopped anticipating the possibility. He told me that morning. "Not asked, tonight. Dinner. I need you at the table." I set my coffee down. "I'm not a centerpiece." "No," he agreed. "You're my bookkeeper and the woman who's been holding this organization's finances together for 4 days. They know you exist. If I put you in a back room, they'll read it as weakness. If I put you at my right hand, they'll see me as a target," I said. He looked at me for a moment. "Only if you present yourself as prey." A garment bag appeared on my bed at 6 o'clock. Dark emerald silk, simple cut. The kind of dress that doesn't need to announce itself. I put it on. Stood in front of the bathroom mirror. The girl from the alley looked back at me. Except she didn't. Not quite. The girl from the alley had eyes that were always slightly braced. Always in mild anticipation of impact. These eyes were calculating. I went downstairs. There were 4 men besides Dorian. They had the collective energy of men who found their own company very satisfying and weren't particularly interested in expanding the circle. I took my seat to Dorian's right. Held the crystal glass carefully. Let my face settle into neutral. The largest one, a man named Victor with a spiderweb tattoo climbing his throat, spent the first course making his assessment of me very obvious and very unwelcome. The kind of attention that has nothing to do with respect. The dangerous one sat across from me, Lucian Dorian's second in command, lean, sharp-featured. A smile that arrived on his face a full beat before it engaged his eyes and departed the same way. Like the smile was a decision, made, executed, retracted. On a schedule, I had been reading his finances for 4 days. I knew exactly what kind of man he was before he opened his mouth. So, Lucian said, dragging his knife across his steak with deliberate leisure. The metal shrieked against the porcelain. Slow, intentional. This is the stray from the Costa Mesa game. Heard she ran you 50 large. He addressed the table. Not me. Like I was a topic rather than a person present at the discussion. Steep price for a bookkeeper. Every fork stopped. The table went to a particular kind of silence that rooms go to when someone has said something that might be the last thing they say. Dorian lifted his wine glass, took a measured sip. Said nothing. Watching me. Waiting, I felt the shape of the test. Again. Always a test. My heart was throwing itself at my ribs like something trapped. But I thought about my father. 11 years of patient, meticulous, dangerous work. I thought about what it costs to stay silent when you know exactly what the numbers say. I set my fork down. The sound of it was very precise. Very intentional. Very loud in all that held breath. 50,000 is an interesting amount for you to question, Lucian. My voice came out low and steady. Quiet carries better than loud. Quiet makes people lean in. Particularly given that you authorized a transfer of $62,000 to a Cayman account last month, flagged as logistical oversight. On a shipment that, according to every other record in the file, cleared customs without any third-party involvement whatsoever, the smile left his face, not faded. Erased, I audited the books this week, I continued, lifting my wine glass, swirling it. The dark red moved up the sides and clung. That transfer bypassed the central holding account entirely. Just vanished. So if we're having a conversation about steep prices and questionable assets, I'd suggest we start closer to home. Victor made a sound that he tried to convert into a cough. Lucian's hands went flat on the table. You lying little. Dorian moved. Not quickly in the way that looks dramatic, just. Stopped being on one side of the table and arrived at another, one hand in Lucian's lapels. Lucian's chest against the wood with enough force to rattle every piece of crystal on the table. Wine spreading across the white linen like a wound. Finish it, Dorian said, barely above a whisper. Which made it worse. Finish the sentence, Lucian, and I will show you, in front of this entire table, exactly how I handle people who speak that way about someone under my protection. Lucian's throat moved. A bead of sweat traced down his temple. He shook his head. Small and fast. My mistake, boss. Misunderstanding. I apologize. 3 seconds of silence. Dorian held him there, letting the room feel the weight of it. Then he released him, picked up his napkin, removed a drop of wine from his cuff with patient precision. Adeline is not a stray, he said, addressing the table calmly, completely. She is the reason this organization is currently solvent. Her analysis is my analysis. If she identifies a discrepancy, I respond to it accordingly. He sat back down. Understood? A chorus. Tight. Obedient. Yes, boss. For the rest of the meal, no one looked at me directly. No one addressed me. I sat in the emerald silk while my pulse finally descended to something manageable, and let myself feel, for just a moment, what it was like to be protected. I took a sip of wine. It tasted like something I hadn't known I was hungry for. I hated how much I wanted more of it. The house emptied by 2 a.m. I was in the kitchen. Barefoot. Cold water. The adrenaline had left behind the particular hollowness that follows when the thing you've been preparing for finally happens, and the body doesn't immediately know what to do with the absence of threat. I heard his steps before I heard him. Measured. Heavy. I knew his tread the way you come to know the sound of approaching weather. Dorian stopped beside me at the counter. He'd shed the jacket and tie, top buttons open. He smelled of scotch and the ghost of cigar smoke. You missed a discrepancy, he said. Looking out the window at the dark, I stopped mid-sip. I checked every routing number twice. The 62,000 was the only anomaly in the file. I didn't say financial error. He turned his head. The kitchen light put shadows on the planes of his face. I said discrepancy. You implied Lucian stole the money. He didn't. The glass met the counter. Then who did? I did. Flat. Simple. I moved it to a private account 3 weeks ago. It was a test. I wanted to determine whether Lucian had been monitoring my blind spots. I stared at him, turning it over, the dinner. Lucian's face, the silence that had spread across the table like the wine across the linen. You let me accuse an innocent man, I said, in front of his colleagues. You put a target on my back knowing full well he had nothing to do with it. I needed to see if you had the instinct to act on incomplete information under pressure. You used me. The anger arrived suddenly, real and hot. I am not a chess piece. I am not a soldier you move around a board. He stepped toward me, the air in the kitchen compressed, the way air does when the pressure changes. When something is about to arrive, aren't you? He was close. I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. You sat at my table. You wore my colors. You dismantled a man standing in this organization with 4 sentences and a glass of wine. You placed yourself on this board the moment you opened your mouth tonight. Not because I forced you, because it was the only move that worked. And you knew it, because surviving was the only option available to me. The words came out ahead of any plan to say them. I don't have the luxury of staying quiet and waiting for them to improve. That's what prey does, and I am done. Being prey, something shifted in his eyes. A door. Moving. Just a fraction. You enjoyed it, he said, low. I watched you take that sip of wine after. You weren't performing. You were savoring it. I didn't enjoy it. You're a terrible liar, Adeline. His hand. Large. Calloused. Rough from years of things I didn't want to think about too specifically. Cupped the side of my face. His thumb moved along my jaw with a deliberateness that wasn't habit. That was choice. I should have stepped back. I had 17 entirely rational reasons to step back, except I was tired. Tired in the structural, cellular way. 3 years of shrinking. Of making myself smaller, quieter, less present, less of a problem. And here was a man who had looked at me and seen something that wasn't small. Who had sat across a desk from me and watched me work, and not once pretended the work was less than it was. I grabbed the front of his shirt and pulled him down. The kiss wasn't romantic in any soft sense of the word. It was a collision. 18 years of held breath, and 3 years of being invisible, and 1 night of being seen. It tasted like scotch and anger, and something without a name yet. He made a sound low in his chest. Both arms came around me, one hand tangled in my hair, the other at my waist, lifting me slightly off the cold floor. I held his shoulders, anchored myself. He backed me into the counter. The marble edge hit my lower back. Hard enough to jar, hard enough to knock the breath out of him, where the stitches were still in his side. He pulled back from my mouth, pressed his forehead to my shoulder, breathing rough and uneven against my collarbone. Your stitches? I gasped. Don't care about the stitches. I put those in. I have very strong feelings about the stitches, a sound that might have been a laugh if it hadn't been interrupted by pain. He didn't move away. Stood there with his face against my neck, and his heartbeat slamming against my hands where I'd moved them to his back. Heavy, uneven, like a machine that had been running too fast for too long. I kept my hands there, feeling it, not moving. We stayed like that until the rain started again, soft this time, gentle on the windows. Until the silence in the kitchen was a different kind of silence than any silence between us had been before, not the silence of 2 strangers inside a transaction. Something that had cost both of us something to get to. Something that changed the shape of the room. I was back in my room by 4, lay on my back in the dark, the ceiling, the sound of new rain, tried to think clearly about a man I was rapidly losing my ability to think clearly about. He had arranged everything. Margaret's debt, the tables, the sequence of events that had ended with me standing in a rainy alley with nowhere to go. He had done all of that because he'd made a promise to my dead father, which meant he knew how my father had died, which meant he knew who killed him, which meant the notebook under my mattress wasn't just a historical record. It was leverage over someone still operational, someone who might still sit at Friday dinner tables with practiced smiles and careful hands. I sat up, I pulled the notebook out, opened it to the last page, protect the girl. She's all that matters. My father had written that and then gone to his desk and died. Or been made to die. He keeps his promises, Matteo had said. The question was, which promises? And at what cost? And whether the man who'd kissed me in the kitchen was keeping a promise to protect me, or keeping me close because I was the most useful thing in the room. There is a difference between being valued and being useful. A girl who spent 3 years as household currency knows how fast one becomes the other. I needed information I didn't have, Lucien. Start with Lucien. One anomaly in the paper files wasn't enough. I needed the digital records, the ones the vanished accountant had taken, or something close to them. Something with enough data to trace the full pattern. I had an idea, an uncomfortable one, but I had my father's patience, and 4 days before the next customs clearance. Matteo found me in the library the next morning. I was on the floor, every paper file spread around me in chronological order, cross-referencing by hand the way my father had taught me. He stood in the doorway, Took in the scene. "You're not going to enjoy what you find," he said. "Tell me anyway." He came in, sat on the arm of the leather chair. Quiet for a moment. Lucian was here before Dorian. He was the number 2 under the previous leadership. He stayed because he knew where things were buried. Literally sometimes. A pause. But he's never been loyal. He's just been patient. Waiting for the math to tip. For the moment when taking becomes cheaper than serving, Dorian knows. Dorian knows most things. He keeps Lucian close because a visible risk is manageable. An invisible one isn't. I looked up. The archive. Does Dorian keep recordings? Old meetings from before he took over, a long silence. "There's a room," Matteo said carefully. "Off the east wing, the wing I'm not allowed in, that wing." I held his gaze. "And if someone were to be in that wing tonight, hypothetically, would that be the worst possible outcome for everyone involved?" Matteo looked at the floor, then at me, then back at the floor. He stood. Walked to the door. "I'm going to check the perimeter," he said, looking straight ahead. "The East Wing cameras cycle to a 10-second gap at 11 p.m. I'll need approximately 45 minutes for a thorough check." He left, and I sat in the middle of my father's scattered financial records and thought, this is what real loyalty looks like. Not perfect, not uncomplicated, but real. I found the archive at 1115 small room, filing cabinets, a shelf of external drives organized by year and month, old equipment that had been maintained rather than replaced. The kind of room that accumulates in institutions with long memories. I found a drive from the year before my father died, plugged it into the terminal in the corner. The fan was loud, the screen was slow, and then it opened audio files, dozens of them. Meeting recordings organized by date. I found one from 8 months before the date on his death certificate. I pressed play stick. Then voices. A room full of men, the way you can always tell from a recording. A particular density to the air. A weight, and then my father's voice. 2 words. His name, given at the start of the meeting. Just 2 words in his voice, and my chest opened like old wood, splitting along a grain line it had always had, but had managed to hold closed until exactly this moment. I pressed my hand flat on the desk, waited, breathed. The meeting was procedural for most of its length. Financials, logistics, the dry architecture of a criminal operation running its quarterly review. And then, near the end, a voice I didn't know. Clipped, very precise, talking about a liability, a problem. Someone who had found something they shouldn't have found and needed to be resolved before it became a structural issue. Then another voice, one I did know younger than I'd heard it. Harder, before whatever had softened the edges by any degree at all. But unmistakable Dorian Vale's voice saying, "Handle it quietly. His family stays out of it. That's a line we don't cross." And the first voice, "And if he's already made copies?" A pause. "Then we find them afterward." I removed the earbuds, sat in the dark room for a long time. Hawed it quietly, the line they didn't cross. My father was dead, and Dorian Vale had been in that room. Not the one who gave the order, but present, aware, in a position to have stopped it and choosing instead to draw a smaller line. He'd protected me. The line had held in that specific way. I was alive. Margaret was unharmed, but my father. My father had gone to his desk and died at 43, and I had spent 3 years believing it was his heart. I put the drive back exactly as I'd found it. Walked back through the dark hallway, into my room with its white linens and its window. I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark with a notebook on my chest, and my father's voice in my ears in the specific way dead people speak to you when you find them in places you didn't expect. Not the one who gave the order. I knew that. I knew the difference between commission and complicity. My father had taught me to be precise about exactly this kind of distinction. But knowing the difference didn't make the dark any lighter. Who had said resolve it? The clipped voice. The precise one. The one that had evaluated a man's life like a line item on a quarterly report. I needed more. I needed everything. But first I needed to decide something. Whether the man, down the hall, the one with the rough hands and the promise made to a dead man, was someone I could trust with what I'd found. Or whether the kiss in the kitchen had been the most dangerous thing I'd done since stepping into the rain. Numbers don't lie. Follow them. All the way to the end, whatever I found there. I spent 3 days in the library, not hiding, working. There's a meaningful difference, even when it looks the same from outside, every paper file spread on the floor. Chronological first, then by account structure, then by the names attached to each routing number, cross-referenced against the archive dates I'd memorized from the East Wing. I didn't sleep much. I ate when Matteo left trays. Coffee until my hands buzzed with it, and slowly. The way an image develops in a dark room. Dark shapes emerging from light gray nothing. The 62,000 in the paper files wasn't a single anomaly. It was the edge of a pattern. Small amounts moved across different accounts with different labels. Logistical oversight, consulting fee, maintenance retainer, security review, each one just small enough to avoid automatic flagging, each one moving through a different channel. But added together, tracked across the full scope of what I had access to, they resolved into a number that sat in my chest like something swallowed wrong. $4.3 million. Moved over 4 years, Lucian hadn't been skimming. He'd been building. And then something worse. Something that made my hands go cold even though the library was warm. The transfers didn't stay in the Caymans. The Cayman account was a relay point. The money kept moving. Through a Malta shell. Through a numbered account in a private Austrian bank. And then to a final destination that appeared in 3 separate actions across 18 months, a holding company. Registered in Nevada, the same Nevada LLC Dorian used for payroll, Lucian wasn't just stealing from Dorian. He was routing stolen money through Dorian's own infrastructure, so that if anyone with the authority to investigate ever looked carefully, the trail would lead directly to Dorian, not Lucian. Dorian. He was building a bomb, a financial one, with Dorian's name wired into every part of the casing, and the accountant who had vanished. The one who'd taken 4 years of encrypted records. Dorian had assumed he'd sold them or been killed for them. But the timing, the dates. The accountant had left 3 days after the last transfer to the Nevada LLC cleared, not sold. Not killed, paid. Lucian had paid him to take the records and disappear. To strip away the only comprehensive view of the books that existed. To leave Dorian operating blind at exactly the moment the bomb needed to go undetected. 4 years of patience. Structured. Methodical. The way a man builds something when he believes he's the only one who can see the full picture. The only thing Lucian hadn't accounted for was me. I went to Dorian's office at midnight, light on. Of course, he barely slept. I'd stopped being surprised by it. I pushed the door. He was behind the desk, shirt untucked, untouched scotch at his elbow, a pen in his hand that he wasn't using. Just holding the way you hold something when your hands need occupation so your mind can work. He looked up. "You found something," he said. I dropped the folder I'd been building for 3 days on his desk. Every transaction, every path, every date. Organized the way my father would have organized it. Chronological. Clean. Irrefutable. Lucian has been siphoning for 4 years. 4.3 million, conservatively, across the full period. He routed it through your Nevada Payroll LLC. If the feds ever open your books, the stolen money looks like yours. I tapped the summary page. He also paid your accountant to disappear with the digital records. Not a competitor, Lucian. He needed the comprehensive picture gone before anyone could trace it. Dorian looked at the folder. At me. Back to the folder. He's building towards something, I said. A takeover. The funding is nearly complete. Whatever he's planning, he's close to ready to move. Dorian set the pen down, precise. Parallel to the desk's edge. How long have you known? Suspected after the dinner. Confirmed 2 days ago. You didn't come to me immediately. Partial information in a situation like this gets people killed. I needed the full picture first. A pause. Your father used to say exactly that, he said quietly. And there it was, the opening I'd been sitting with for 3 days. Deciding whether to walk through it. I walked through it. I was in the East Wing, I said. Even. 3 nights ago. I found the archive. I found the recording. The room went very quiet. The kind of quiet that has texture. Dorian's face didn't change. But something behind it shifted like bedrock. Slow, significant. The kind of shift that isn't visible from the outside, but changes everything structural. I know, he said. Matteo told me. Of course, then you know what I heard. Yes, you were in that room. Yes, you didn't stop it. He stood, walked to the window, the bay, the constant dark water. No, he said, I didn't stop it. I drew a line and I held the line, and your father is still dead, and those 2 things are both true simultaneously. And I have not found a way to carry them that doesn't cost something every day. Silence. Waves. Who gave the order? I said. He turned from the window. Lucian, the stone in my chest rearranged itself. It was his voice, Dorian said. The precise one. The clipped one. Lucian was the number 2 under my predecessor. He'd been building his position for years before I ever arrived. Your father found the pattern, the same one you just found, and came to me with it. Before I could act on it, Lucian learned he'd come to me. And Lucian moved faster than I did. I sat down in the chair across from his desk. Lucian, the flat, dead smile. The knife dragged across the plate. The eyes that took an extra half-second to catch up to everything his face was doing. Lucian had looked at my father. A man with reading glasses and coffee, and 11 years of meticulous, dangerous work, and decided he was a problem to be solved before the quarter closed. "Why didn't you tell me from the beginning?" I said. "Because I needed to know if you were capable of what I needed you to be capable of. Before I handed you a target," a pause, "and because I wasn't sure you'd stay if you knew, and I had promised your father you would be safe, and keeping you here felt like the only version of safe I could offer." Another test. Everything is a test, Adeline. That's not cruelty, that's methodology. It's how people in this business survive long enough to do anything that matters. What are you going to do about Lucian? What I should have done 3 years ago when... He looked at me, and the exhaustion in his eyes was immense. Real. The kind accumulated over years of carrying something in a space too small for it. He'll move soon. He knows the books are being reconstructed. He knows I have someone working the numbers. He'll want to act before the picture is complete. A pause. We have very little time. I stood up. Picked up my folder. Then we shouldn't waste what we have. The attack came on a Thursday. Not that the day mattered. Just. That's what it was. Thursday morning. Gray coastal light. Rain smell off the bay. The espresso machine in the kitchen doing its work. I was in the library, chasing a final routing number through paper copies and memory. The first sound wasn't dramatic. A thud, low, wrong, weight landing where it shouldn't, then the alarm. Not a siren, a low electronic pulse bone deep. Designed to disorient rather than alert, then the gunfire, nothing like television. Nothing rhythmic or cinematic, just chaotic, deafening noise like someone dragging steel pipe across a tin roof. Ugly and random and absolutely real. Plaster exploded in the hallway. A coastal photograph on the wall burst into a cloud of glass and paper. My knees went first. Just dropped me onto the library floor. Hands shaking too hard to grip the desk. Adeline, his voice cut through the alarm like a blade through cloth. The library door came off its hinges. Not opened. Off, Dorian filled the frame. Dark jeans, tactical vest, rifle, knuckles white. Blood on his left cheekbone from something that had already happened. Get up. Now, this was not the man from the kitchen. Not the man at the window staring at the water. This was what lived underneath all of that. What he'd been built from before anything else. I got up. Lucian sold our gate frequency to the Volkov syndicate. They bypassed the outer perimeter. He had my forearm. Iron. Moving. 4 minutes, maybe less, before they breached the inner doors. Gray chemical smoke in the hallway. It hit my lungs, and I coughed, eyes streaming. We moved. Fast. He kept me behind him with one hand back, fingers locked around my wrist, cleared every corner before pulling me through. Every stairwell checked before we descended. The steel door at the end of the north corridor. I'd walked past it 100 times without knowing what it was. Dorian hit the biometric scanner with his palm. Red light. He hit it again. Red. Lucian locked us out of the bunker remotely, through his teeth. He's running the digital infrastructure, while the Volkov men run the physical. Coordinated takedown. Both layers simultaneously. I stared at the red light, physical and digital, running at the same time. 4 years of patience building to exactly this night, and then my mind did the thing my father had trained it to do. The panic didn't disappear, it just relocated. Moved somewhere accessible but not obstructive, like a file moved off the desktop, still there. Not in the way. I grabbed Dorian's tactical vest, the server room. Where? He looked down at me, eyes sharp and wild at once. Basement. Why? Because Lucian is an arrogant man who reused his encryption key across his entire shadow infrastructure. The back door I found in his offshore routing software. It's the same system, same key. If I get to the physical terminal, I can bypass the biometric lock from the software layer. He stared at me, boots on the stairs. Men shouting in Russian if you can't do it from the terminal, he said. Flat. We die in the basement. I can do it. You're certain. I'm my father's daughter. 1 second. Just one. His eyes on mine. Blood on his cheekbone. The whole weight of the night. He grabbed my hand. Run. The basement. Damp concrete. Hot server racks. The cooling fans drowning the sounds of the house above us. Gunfire coming through as vibration more than sound. Dorian shoved me into the glass-walled server room. Turned. Put his back to the single steel door. Rifle up, 2 minutes. Ragged breathing. Left hand drifting to his ribs where the stitches were pulling. They'll find the stairwell. I was already at the terminal. Screen locked. Front-end security. Standard corporate interests. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Fine motor tremor from the adrenaline the moment I touched the keys. The tremor stopped muscle memory. My father's hands over mine at the kitchen table. Patience. Precision. Press harder at the end of the line when you're really thinking. I bypassed the login, command prompt, black screen, white text, logical and clean in mine. I typed the string I'd used to audit Lucian's Cayman accounts. Same encryption key, same foundation. Arrogance builds its whole architecture on one load-bearing assumption, that no one else is as smart as you are. They're on the stairs, Dorian said, still calm. The terrifying calm of someone who has been in rooms exactly like this before and survived them through methodology, not luck. He fired twice. Something heavy fell on the other side of the door. I'm in the network. I found the security directory, found the biometric lock protocol for the bunker door. 20 yards of concrete, and then my screen filled with something else, a secondary window. Launching itself. Running active transfer protocol, not the bunker, not the security grid. Lucian's drain sequence, triggered remotely, from wherever he was sitting safe while his hired men did the physical work. Emptying Dorian's operational accounts in real time, payroll, logistics, Breeb accounts, shipping escrow, all of it. Moving. Right now the progress bar climbed. 22%. Dorian, my voice came out level. Which surprised me. Busy. He triggered the financial drain. He's taking everything liquid. All of it. A shot. The steel door shuddered. Open the bunker. Let the money go. 38%. I looked at the progress bar. If Lucian got the money, the organization didn't collapse tonight. It collapsed in 3 weeks. A month. No payroll meant no soldiers. No soldiers meant no protection. No protection meant the rival syndicates arrived and found a king with a crown but no kingdom. We could survive tonight and still lose everything by spring. 51%. I didn't try to stop the transfer. Stopping it midstream would trigger automated countermeasures. Lucian would have built fail-safes into something this important. Any interruption, any flag, and the accounts locked permanently. Gone, so I didn't stop it. I opened a secondary terminal window. I changed where it was going. 2 days ago at 2 a.m, I had quietly registered a shell company, using the back-end access Lucian's own software had given me. Single signatory, no history, no footprint. An entity whose only officer was a girl named Adeline Crow. I highlighted the destination account in Lucian's drain protocol, deleted it, pasted mine. The progress bar stuttered. 1 second. Like a train switching tracks at full speed, then resumed. 67%. They're at the door, Dorian said. 2 more shots, very close. Adeline, almost. 83%. I tabbed to the security directory. Found the bunker lock. Status field. Locked heighted it. Open enter. The floor vibrated. A mechanical groan traveling up through the concrete, through the chair legs, into my spine. Something massive and old deciding to move. 20 yards down the corridor. The vault door swung inward. Go, I screamed. Already out of the chair, yanked the external drive from the port. Shoved it in my pocket. Dorian grabbed the back of my sweater. We ran. The vault door. 30 feet. 2010. Behind us, the steel entry door exploded inward. Men poured through. Gunfire in the enclosed space was a physical thing. Concrete chips burst from the floor beside my feet. Like wasps. Like small angry stones, 5 feet, we dove through the vault door. Dorian hit the manual override, an industrial lever. He threw his whole body weight against it. The door reversed. Swung shut. The pneumatic seals engaged with the sound of a held breath finally released, and everything, the guns, the shouting, the dying house above us, cut off, gone, silence. Emergency lights flickering on one by one, yellow and sickly, the color of old photographs. I was on the floor, both hands flat on cold steel, chest heaving. Next to me, Dorian was slumped against the vault door, head tipped back, eyes closed. His chest moving in wet, uneven intervals I didn't like the sound of. I pushed myself up. His shirt was soaked through on the left side. Dark, you're bleeding. Noticed. The stitches are gone, also noticed. I put those in. I have opinions about those stitches. Something crossed his face. Pain adjacent to something that might have been amusement. Hard to tell. It was always hard to tell with him. I crawled to the medical kit, bolted to the wall. Got to work. Because that's what you do when someone is bleeding, and you know how to stop it, and the alternative is unacceptable. The sutures, the tape, the pressure bandage. His breathing leveled as the immediate crisis became manageable, then quiet again. Just the air filtration system. The emergency lights buzzing. You opened the door, he said. I did more than that. I reached into my pocket, set the hard drive on the floor between us. Lucian triggered the drain sequence while we were running. He was going to take every liquid asset you have. You'd survive tonight and be bankrupt in 3 weeks. Dorian looked at the drive, then at me, reading something in my face. What did you do? I didn't stop the transfer, steady. Direct. No apology in it. Stopping it would have triggered his fail-safes. So I let it run, Adeline. I changed the destination. The longest silence of the entire night, the air filtration system. The lights. Where is the money, he said. Quiet, measured. The voice of a man deciding very deliberately how to respond to something that could go several different directions. A shell company I registered 2 days ago. I held his gaze. Single signatory. Me. He looked at me. I looked back, yellow light. The whole impossible night pressing down through 2 feet of reinforced concrete above us. You took my entire empire, he said, slowly. With a few keystrokes and about 45 seconds, I secured your empire. Lucian thought he was taking everything. Instead, he handed it to me, and I'm sitting in a bunker with you instead of running. I let that sit. Think about what that means. He was quiet for a long time. The way he thought, all the way down to the bottom of a thing. Not skimming. You could have taken it and left me in that corridor, he said finally. $68 million and a long head start. No one in the world would have found you. I know, why didn't you? And here it was. The question I'd been circling for weeks. For every hour since the alley and the rusted penny taste of blood and the warm seat in the back of a car going somewhere unknown. Because running is for prey, I said. And I am done being prey. His hand came up, rough, warm, cupped the side of my face. His thumb traced my jaw with deliberate care. The way you handle something you've decided you're not willing to lose. You're not prey, Adeline. Very quiet. You're the apex. He kissed me. Not like the kitchen. Not collision and fury and all that accumulated heat. This was slower. Deliberate. The way you do something when you've stopped pretending you don't want to. It tasted like concrete dust and old metal and the specific, irreplaceable relief of something terrible ending. In the yellow light of a panic room, with men who couldn't reach us scratching at the reinforced steel above, I understood something my father had probably understood too. Some promises aren't made to the living, and some things that look like imprisonment turn out to be the only room in the building with a lock that works from the inside. They pulled back before dawn. The comms terminal in the bunker had satellite uplink. Mateo had held the east corridor. Hayes, Dorian's newest enforcer, had secured the vehicle bay. 3 of Lucian's men had been taken. The Volkov team, once the financial drain was interrupted and the tactical objective became unclear, withdrew. Lucian was gone. Already running. He'd been watching the drain sequence and saw the moment the destination changed. Saw that someone had outmaneuvered him. Understood immediately that everything he'd built over 4 years had just been turned against him. Dorian made 2 calls from the bunker, both short, both quiet. The machinery of obligation he'd built over years began to move. We came out at 7 in the morning. Gray dawn light, spent gunpowder and wet stone. The house was damaged but standing. Walls needed work. The marble floor of the foyer had cracked. Plaster would take weeks, but standing. Mateo met us at the top of the basement stairs. He looked at me for a long moment, then at Dorian, then back at me. He nodded. The same small, precise nod he'd given me since the first morning he'd brought a tray to my room. Except this one was different in weight. It said, "You were always going to be more than furniture. I just waited for you to know it too. I transferred the $68 million back, not at once. Over 6 days. Structured increments through the new routing architecture. Clean. Untraceable. Legal enough on the surface to survive scrutiny. The shell company dissolved quietly behind it. Like footprints in rain, Dorian watched me work. He didn't ask for the passwords, didn't demand access, didn't hover. He let me do what I did, which was, I was slowly understanding, one of the most significant things anyone had ever done for me. A man who controlled everything, always. Letting go of the wheel. On the 6th day, I pushed back from the desk. "It's clean," I said. New routing chain, new shell layers. Nevada LLC burned and rebuilt under a different registration. I turned the laptop to face him, and I added something. A monitoring protocol embedded in the accounting software. Any account movement above a threshold flags to a secondary terminal. Mine. In real time. No one moves money in this organization without me seeing it. He looked at the screen. At me. You made yourself structural, he said. I made myself impossible to remove without the whole thing falling apart. I closed the laptop. Yes, a long beat. Your father would have done exactly that. I know, I said. He just never got the chance. Lucian lasted 11 days. Not because Dorian's people were slow. Because Dorian wanted him to understand for 11 full days. The experience of being hunted by the thing you thought you'd destroyed. Resources cut off one by one. Calls going to silence. Accounts empty. The 4 years of patient work unraveling in reverse, like a sweater pulled thread by thread. He was found at the docks, a shipping container. Locked from the outside, just like the stories. The ones the city told in the dark. The ones people repeated in whispers because saying them too clearly felt like it might summon something. I didn't ask what had happened inside. I already knew the shape of this world's justice. Not courts, not verdicts. Not closure in any form a law school would recognize. But real, in its own way. I sat in the library that night. His notebook in my lap, the last page, protect the girl. She's all that matters, I know, I said. To the empty room, to the sound of the waves. To him, wherever the gone go. I know you did. The whole time, Margaret and Sienna came 3 weeks later. I was on the warehouse catwalk when Hayes brought them in. I'd been expecting something like this. People like Margaret always came back when they ran out of other options. They were brought through the main bay doors, flanked, looking terrible in the specific way of people who've spent weeks running and haven't slept and have learned for the first time in their lives what it means to have no one left to manipulate. Margaret's hair was unwashed, her tracksuit stained. She looked up at the catwalk, and when she saw me, her face cracked open into something that wanted to be relief and kept sliding into desperation. Nora, she'd always called me that when she wanted something. My middle name. The soft version, Nora. Sweetheart, thank God. I've been trying to find you for weeks. I came down the metal stairs. Each step rang on the grating. I kept my pace even. Unhurried, I stopped 10 feet from her. Looked at both of them. Sienna wouldn't meet my eyes. She was staring at the concrete floor, jaw trembling. She'd always been better at pretending cruelty was neutrality. She didn't have the vocabulary for what was happening to her right now. You owe the Morano family money, I said. Not a question. It was a bad run, Margaret said quickly, the words tumbling. Just a bad streak, it happens to everyone, you know how it goes. But they're saying they'll... Nora, they said they'll hurt Sienna, you can't let that happen, you have money now. You clearly have money, you can make one call, and... You sold me, I said. Key. Clear, carrying easily through the warehouse. You put me in an alley in the rain and sold me to a man you thought was going to destroy me. For $50,000 and a clean slate, I looked at her, specifically, without heat, without the rage I'd expected to feel and somehow didn't. Just clarity. The clarity of a ledger finally balanced, and you would do it again. If the math worked out, I did what I had to do to... You did what you wanted to do, I said, and called it necessity. There's a difference. Margaret's face shifted, the appeal falling away. Something uglier underneath. I kept a roof over your head, she said. I fed you. For 3 years You used me, I said. For 3 years. And then you sold me. And you're here now not because you're sorry. You're here because you're out of options, and I'm the only resource you haven't exhausted yet. I looked at Hayes. What's the standard procedure when someone uses this organization's name as collateral without authorization? Hayes didn't blink. We hand them back to whoever they owe. With a note that they have no backing from us and no assets to speak of. Margaret screamed. The sound bounced off the warehouse walls, the corrugated metal ceiling, the concrete floor, raw and ugly and frightened. I didn't move. Nora, you can't. You can't do this. You're a good girl. You've always been a good girl. I leaned down until I could smell the fear on her breath. I was a good girl, I said. Soft, very precise, and good girls don't survive what you built. You taught me that. So I stopped. I straightened. Smoothed the front of my jacket. Hand them over, I said. And I turned around, and I walked back up the stairs. Each step rang, clean. Final, I didn't watch them leave. I turned back to the railing, the warehouse floor below, the organized movement of crates and logistics, and the operational architecture I'd spent 2 months rebuilding from the foundation up. Behind me, Dorian came up the stairs. 2 coffees. He handed me one, stood beside me at the railing, shoulder to shoulder. Cyprus accounts cleared, he said. I moved them yesterday. I took a sip. Black, same as always. Malta Relay is fully insulated. Volkov's shipping routes are compromised through Q2. Compliments of your father's notebooks. Compliments of my father's notebooks. Because that was the thing no one had understood. The notebooks weren't just a record of crimes. They were a map. 4 years of operational intelligence, account structures, personnel contacts, supply networks, the skeleton of half a dozen criminal organizations documented in my father's patient, irrefutable hand. Thomas Crow had spent 11 years building that map. He'd never gotten to use it. I used it for him. Dorian was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that means something is coming. When I took this organization over, he said, 3 years ago, there was a conversation I should have had with you then. About your father, about what I knew, and what I didn't do, what stopped you. Guilt, mostly. A pause. I was in that room. I heard Lucian's voice give that order, and I told myself that drawing the line, protecting you, protecting your family, was sufficient. That it made me different enough from the man who crossed it. He was looking at the warehouse floor. Not at me. It didn't. Inaction cost your father his life the same as if I'd given the order myself. You knew who I was, I said. Before the alley. Before any of it. Yes, you engineered the whole situation. Margaret's debt, the tables, everything. Yes, because you owed him. Because I failed him, Dorian said. Because he came to me with information that was going to get him killed, and I moved too slowly, and Lucian moved first. And a man who did nothing wrong except know too much died at 43. And his daughter spent 3 years being treated like a household liability by a woman who was never fit to be trusted with her. He finally looked at me. The weight in his eyes was something I recognized now. I'd been trying to name it for weeks. It wasn't guilt exactly. It was the particular exhaustion of someone who has been keeping a very long, very private account and knows the balance will never reach 0. There is no version of this where I've behaved well, Adeline. I manipulated you into a situation instead of being honest with you. I tested you instead of trusting you. I kept your father's story from you when you deserved it from the beginning. A pause. But I kept the line. I kept you safe. I kept the notebook until you were ready for it. I meant to give it to you when you had something around you that could hold. When you were out of reach of people who would use it against you, I held my coffee in both hands. Warm. My father trusted you, I said, in the end. When he found the evidence, he came to you. Not anyone else? Yes, he didn't trust easily, no. He didn't. That means something. Dorian looked back at the warehouse floor. I hope it does, he said. I've spent 3 years hoping it does. The warehouse hummed below us. Crates moving. Trucks positioning. The whole clean, restructured operation running on the architecture I'd built. The promise you made him, I said. Protect the girl. Is that still what this is? He was quiet for a genuine moment. Not calculating. Not deciding what to say. Just actually quiet. No, he said. It stopped being that a while ago when you walked into the light in the foyer and asked where the trauma kit was. A pause. Maybe before that. I'm not sure I could locate the exact moment even if I tried. I took a sip of coffee. The cold morning air moved around us. I'm not forgiving you for all of it, I said. Some of it is going to take longer than 3 months to work through, I know, and I'm not going anywhere. Because this is mine as much as it's yours now. I built half of what's running down there, and because running is for prey. And I made myself a promise about that, I remember. Good. Hold me to it if I forget. His arm came around me. Warm and solid and certain, his chin near my temple, both of us looking out over the same floor. And for a long time we stood like that, in the cold coastal air, the sound of work being done, the organization running clean for the first time in years. My father's notebooks were in the office safe, indexed, referenced, used, finally, for what I believed he'd always intended. Not as evidence for courts that would never see it, not as personal leverage, as a tool. For taking apart the thing that had taken him apart, Lucian was gone, Margaret's debt had been paid, not in money. In the only currency that actually settles an account like that. And I was still here. Not because I had nowhere else to go. Not out of fear. But because I had looked at everything this world was, in full light, with clear eyes, and I had made a choice. I was Thomas Crow's daughter. He had spent 11 years learning how a criminal empire breathed. How it bled. where its pressure points were, how to make money leave no trace and how to follow the trace when following it mattered. He had poured every lesson into me like filling a vessel. In case. Because a man who understood risk always prepared for the possibility that he wouldn't be there to use what he knew himself. He hadn't been wrong about me, and he hadn't been wrong about the man who'd made him a promise. I stood on the catwalk in the cold autumn air, coffee warming my hands, the warehouse floor busy below, the bay dark and restless in the distance. The girl from the alley was gone. The one who braced when doors opened. The one who ate like she expected the meal to be taken back. The one who had been currency, collateral, liability, nothing, gone. What remained was something built from survival and understanding and the specific, irreplaceable education of a man who had loved exactly one thing in this world and made absolutely certain she was ready for whatever came next. The dark didn't feel like danger anymore. It felt like home. Because home isn't always soft lighting and warm walls. Sometimes home is the shape of a fight you're finally equipped to win, the work you were built for, the people who see you clearly, all of you, and choose to stand beside you anyway. Sometimes home is a catwalk over a warehouse in the cold of early autumn, coffee in your hand, the devil at your back, and the absolute, unshakable certainty that you are exactly where you are supposed to be. Numbers don't lie, Addie. I know, Dad. I know.